Welcome to Chat with the Lawyer. I'm your host, Walla Blagay, and I am here with my friend Alex Bernshteyn, who is an immigration attorney. She is going to talk about the hot button issues of immigration, which is very important today. We're going to talk about the kids that are coming into the United States from Central America, along with some other issues of immigrants' rights and how to apply for citizenships in the United States. So listen in if you're an immigrant or you know someone that is. This is your show. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your practice.
I work for a small private firm called Immigrants First. We do a lot of work with immigrants who are in removal proceedings. So that means that the government, for whatever reason, is trying to deport them. Maybe they have some criminal convictions. Maybe they're here without legal status. We also do affirmative applications if somebody's trying to bring over a family member, if somebody wants to apply for a visa because they were a victim of a crime, deferred action for childhood arrivals. So pretty much helping people that are here, that want status, or that would like to bring a family member over.
Well, you guys are busy.
We are busy currently.
Clearly. Now let's get into the issue of Central America. Now we have the children coming over from Central America. What's going on there? Why are they coming here?
Well, there's a debate about that. I can tell you that there are some people that are blaming Obama's 2012 program, which was the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. They're saying that these kids in Central America are getting wind that they can come over and obtain some kind of legal status in the United States, so they're coming over. I can say that in my experience, I don't believe that that's the cause, because the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, only benefits people who were here from June 2007, and that's always been the case, and they've had to have lived here continuously since that time. So recent entrants would have never been eligible for that program in the first place. I think that when I do speak with these children and I ask them why did they come over, bar none, the main reason is because they are just scared of gang violence in their home country. So maybe they've been affected, or maybe in their schools. You know, I'll talk to some kids who say that their schools are overrun by gangs. So on their way to school, they have to pay a fee to a gang member in order just to be able to go to school, or maybe they're being recruited and they don't want to participate in the violence. So I think that the main reason is just that in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, the gang problem has really gotten out of control to the point where kids are fleeing for their lives. They're fleeing so that they don't have to be in a gang, and they're fleeing so that the gangs don't kill them.
Now, you may not know this or not, but there has been stories that those have gone, that kids that have been sent back have been killed. Is that true? Have you heard about that?
I have heard about that, yes. It's an interesting, it's actually very sad, because I think, so a lot of times what these kids are doing is they're coming to the United States and they're applying for what's called asylum. Mm-hmm. So asylum is for somebody who has either faced persecution or fears future persecution based on their race, their nationality, their religion, their political opinion, or their social group. Mm-hmm. So the problem that these kids are facing is that they're coming over and they're saying that I'm being persecuted because I refuse to join a gang. And the asylum officer who interviews them, or the judge who sees their case, oftentimes will say, well, that's not any of those 5 protected grounds. That's not you're not espousing a political opinion. Mm-hmm. You aren't a member of a social group, just in the mere fact that you're refusing to participate in this gang violence. So they're denying their asylum case because it doesn't fit into one of these categories. Mm-hmm. And then they are being sent back, and unfortunately, very traumatically, I have indeed heard of children who get sent back, and indeed they do get killed. I mean, these countries, Honduras has, I believe, the highest murder rate in the world. I believe it's about 90 people for every 100,000. So, and then El Salvador and Guatemala aren't far behind. So it is very much happening. I mean, these kids, they're not making up stories. They are being picked out, targeted, and then if a kid doesn't, if a gang sees a kid every day going to school, and then all of a sudden they're gone, these gang members will suspect, oh, this person fled. If they come back and they see them again, they're going to know that they're trying to escape them. Yeah. There's retaliation, right.
Now, what are the conditions? Now, these children come, let's just start the process. The children come, is their attorney, are you sitting there waiting for them, and are they assigned to an attorney?
Right. They're not necessarily assigned to an attorney. So the government is, to their best ability, supposed to try and help children, and these are children under the age of 18, find pro bono legal counsel. At the same time, immigrants aren't entitled to an attorney. So a lot of, when they come in, so there is a difference between children from Mexico, because that's a contiguous country, and children from Central America. But for the children from Central America, for example, they'll come in and the office, and if they're under 18 from Central America, then the Office of Refugee and Resettlement will try to find out if there's a family member or another sponsor in the United States that's able to take custody over them. And if that's the case, then they will be allowed to go into the custody of that person. Okay. And in which case, they'll still be put in removal proceedings, but they'll be in the custody of that person. And then hopefully that person is able to find either a nonprofit organization, or they're able to hire an attorney with their own means to represent this individual in removal proceedings.
Interesting. Now there is talk that there are like 5-year-olds that are just going to court by themselves. Is that true, or have you seen that?
Unfortunately, yes. You're not, as an immigrant, you're not entitled to an attorney. You're entitled to if you can find a pro bono counsel, or if you can pay for an attorney, but it's not criminal court where one will be appointed to you at government expense. So you're not entitled to an attorney. And most of these kids, a lot of these kids, or if, the other thing is that if you're over 18, then you're so maybe you're 19, or maybe you are 18, but you're 18 or over, then you're in a completely different bracket. And then a lot of times those individuals, they are doing these credible fear interviews, which is to assess the validity of their claim at the border. Those are happening within days after they get there, and there's no legal counsel, and they're having to recount their story, and there's nobody giving them advice. And honestly, what I've seen these credible fear interviews, because then they're written down, and the officer will say, well, do you fear persecution because of your membership in a social group? And those are legal terms, right? So an 18-year-old isn't going to say, well, yes, I believe my personal social group is my family sector because we've been witnesses, or we've reported to the police. Right. So, or they'll say their political opinion, and is it a political opinion to oppose gang violence? Arguably, yes, but they're not thinking of it in those terms. So these people are having to answer these legal questions without any assistance, without really understanding what it is that they're answering. Yeah.
That's interesting. What about the conditions that they're holding the children?
Well, again, unfortunately, I haven't been down to Artesia, New Mexico. That is a very kind of hot button detention facility, because it's a new detention facility in New Mexico, and it houses children and women. And it's kind of it came out because of this surge, so it hasn't been there all along. And the reason that particular detention facility is getting a lot of focus is because it's called a deportation mill, where people are just being deported. And you do hear stories. There's a big movement of attorneys that have gone down there personally, and you do hear stories of breakfast being served at 5 a.m. so the kids aren't hungry at 5 a.m. but then they're not eating, and then they don't eat for hours, and they're losing weight. You do hear stories of the interview, the credible fear interview itself. You'll hear stories of mothers having their children playing, and they're having to, in front of them, and they're having to recount being raped by the children's father, and the kids are screaming or playing or whatever they're doing. So, is due process being served? It's it's unclear at best, I would say.
Oh my goodness! Wow, this is really heartbreaking. Well, let's get into the rights. So, if an immigrant is here, someone comes here, how do they apply for citizenship? What is that process? Just walk us quickly through it.
So for citizenship, so you'd have to be a lawful permanent resident. You'd either have to be a lawful permanent resident for 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen, or 5 years if you got your lawful permanent residence in another way. What's important to remember is that you do have to have 5 years of good moral character. So good moral character can mean not having crimes, but there's also, good moral character, it could mean not having a lot of, drinking effect. Like one DUI within the last 5 years could kick you out of getting citizenship. So my recommendation for a lot of people is to have 5 clean years of no offenses, and then you can apply. What's important to remember is that whenever you submit an application to immigration, what you can risk being put in removal proceedings, meaning that the government can try and deport you. So even green card holders can be deported based on some offenses. So if you have a burglary and then you go and apply for your citizenship, they can, instead of saying no to your citizenship, they can also say, we'll see you in court as well. You have to be careful. But yes, and I do recommend that when green card holders, if they would like to become citizens of the United States, they should. There is an English requirement and a history requirement. So there's questions, the USCIS website, so that's www.uscis.gov, that has sample questions. So you'd have to study for the test. They do ask you questions about civics and the history of the United States. And there is an English language requirement unless you're above 50 or 55, depending on how long you've had your green card. So you do have to have some proficiency in the English language as well.
Now, do they have study materials on uscis.gov?
They do have study materials. So they'll have, so there's 100 questions, and then usually they'll pick about 6 to 10 questions that the officer will ask you. And then if you pass your test and everything looks good with your background check, then you'll do your oath. So you'll have an oath ceremony, which is actually quite special. I've been to a few, and people are very happy to be embraced by the country that they've been living in.
And actually, my mom had that not too long ago. But anyway, let's get back. We're going to come back shortly and talk a little bit more about about applying for citizenship and green card, and also immigrant rights. So please stay tuned.
There are some things in life you can control, and this booklet can help. From keeping your family healthy to saving for retirement. Order your free copy now from the American Diabetes Association, because we want everyone to be healthy and happy.
Welcome back to Chat with the Lawyer. I'm your host, Walla Blagay, and we were talking with Alex Bernshteyn, an immigration lawyer, about applying for citizenship, green card issues. So now we're going to get right back into it. Now, Alex, what do you need to do to apply for a green card?
Well, there's different ways to apply for a green card depending on, if you have a certain type of visa. For example, a U visa is a visa for victims of crimes. They would be able to apply for a green card after having lived here for 3 years. Normally, the way that that person applies for a green card is usually either through work or through family. So through family, the important thing about it is that there is a visa bulletin. So you can also find that on the USCIS website. And so what people are sometimes shocked about is that they'll want to apply for a green card for their family member, but they're not an immediate relative. An immediate relative is a parent, spouse, or child. Maybe you have a brother or sister that you want to apply for. And the problem is that you have to look then at the visa bulletin and see what category you're in depending on your relationship and then your legal status. And sometimes the wait can be 10 or 15 years if you're a sibling. But normally, if you, what I see a lot of times is a spouse. So a U.S. citizen spouse can petition for their loved one that might be here in the U.S. already, for example. What's important is that that there's people that entered without a visa in the first place, they entered without inspection. So they entered crossing illegally, nobody saw them cross in. Those people have to do what's called the provisional waiver. And the provisional waiver is a great thing that came out. It came out in March 2013. And what it is it speeds up the process in terms of getting a family reunited. So normally what happens is if you came illegally in the first place and you've accumulated what's called unlawful status, you've been living here illegally, you have to leave and wait you have to get a waiver, you have to do a consular interview, you're apart from your family for a year or longer. So now you can do all of that in the United States, and then you just leave for about a week or two to do your final interview. So it is, if you have an immediate relative, then this provisional waiver makes it possible for people who came illegally in the first place to petition for their loved ones or to be able to get a green card. And then if you did come here legally or you are in legal status and you have an immediate relative, then that person can petition for you and then you can get your green card that way. So that is also one way to get your green card.
That's good, interesting. Now let's get into rights. Now what rights does an immigrant have here? And at this point we're talking about someone that's documented.
Okay. Documented? Yeah. So, I think that, no matter if you're undocumented or documented, the important thing is that you do have rights. So, if a police officer stops you, you don't want to be hostile, you don't want to just run, but you don't necessarily want to say, where you were born, what your name is, some states you have to say what your name is, but other than that, you don't want to be telling where you live. You just don't need to do that. I mean, the safer thing is to stay silent. The other thing that's important to know is, are you being arrested? Sometimes a police officer will stop you and they'll want to have a chat, and you can say, am I free to go? And if the police officer says no, well, then you're under arrest. You shouldn't leave. But if they say yes, then say, okay, well, I'll see you later, and go. And again, you don't need to reveal where your family lives, where you were born, what your immigration status is to a police officer. That's just it's safer to stay silent, call an attorney, and take it from there.
Now, if the police, you say, am I free to go? And the police says no. At that point, do you remain silent? What should?
Right. So then, at that point, whether you're documented or not, my advice would be to remain silent, and then to call an attorney. And what's important for somebody who not only undocumented, but again, as I mentioned earlier, if you are a lawful permanent resident, you can be deported. So, citizens are the only ones that are truly safe. But if you are in a situation where you are arrested, you can have what's called an ICE detainer placed on you, meaning that the jail can hold you for up to 48 hours, and ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, can come interview you and then decide whether or not to take you. So, so it's important for you to your family. I've called jails before and I've said, does this person have an ICE detainer on them? And the jail will be able to tell me days before that person's released, and then we can plan with their families. What's going to happen. Or an attorney can talk to Immigration and Customs Enforcement beforehand, maybe negotiate with them, maybe say, this is a single mother or a single father. What if he was just released, but then he'll, appear in court and we'll give you a firm address where you can send their court notice. But please don't put them in an immigration detention facility because they're having to care for these individuals. So safety planning is important. If you are arrested, what can you do? Do you have somebody you can call that can pick up your kids from school? Do you know where your documents are? Do you know where your marriage certificate is? Do you know where your children's birth certificates are? Your copies of your taxes? I mean, these are all important things because eventually either ICE or an immigration judge might be contemplating setting a bond, an immigration bond, and those are all things that they take into consideration. They take into consideration your family dynamics, whether you're a person of good moral character, and your contributions to the community. So it'd be nice to have that compiled somewhere so that if a situation were to arise, that you'd be able to get those things to a family member, to an attorney.
Interesting. Well, let's go back to undocumented immigrants, because you said that they do have rights, and that's a surprise to many of us. Many of us would assume that they don't have any rights. So what rights do they have?
So undocumented immigrants have the right to free criminal legal counsel, just as anybody else does. So if you are in criminal proceedings, do not do it alone. Ask for a public defender. And it's especially important for immigrants because what you plead guilty to will have consequences on your future in the United States. And some people think, oh well, I'm only getting probation, so it doesn't matter. But it does. You might be pleading guilty to something that could prohibit you from a visa later on. So you do have the right to criminal counsel, and that criminal attorney is supposed to, they have to under U.S. Supreme Court law, they have to tell you about the implications of your plea if you are here and you're not a citizen. In terms of an immigration attorney, you are entitled to seek an immigration attorney, so you're entitled to, if you're going to court, you can ask the judge for a continuance, saying that you need a little bit of time if it's your first appearance to find an attorney. So you're not entitled to a free attorney, but you are entitled to be represented. So, my plea is that people do try and find legal counsel in an immigration court setting, because it is a hard process to navigate on your own.
And now you mentioned public defenders. Now, undocumented immigrants have a right to a public defender.
In criminal court, yes.
Criminal court only, so not in immigration court.
No, in immigration court, you can find an attorney at no government expense.
Okay, interesting. So there are stories that somebody's riding in the car, they get stopped by the police, and all of a sudden they find themselves detained by ICE. So how does that happen? How do you avoid that? Really just don't get stopped by the police.
Right. It's hard. It's hard to avoid. I can say that, what I see, unfortunately, so many times is it's heartbreaking DUIs. People that have been here for years and they really are great contributors to the community, have family here, and they get a DUI, and now they put their whole life in jeopardy. And it's just, avoid driving intoxicated. Yeah. In Maryland, actually, you're able to get a driver's license. In Virginia, it depends on if you have a certain visa or if you're applying for something, but it is considerably harder to get a driver's license. And if you don't have a driver's license, you aren't allowed to drive. So I know when I tell people that, they say, well, how am I going to get to work? And I don't have a good answer for them, but they're not allowed to drive, so.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the Maryland versus Virginia. Now, Maryland seems to be progressive in its laws, so we can jump into that and maybe jump back into some other stuff. Let's talk about the progress that Maryland has.
Yeah, Maryland, and again, immigration law is federal, so Maryland can't change immigration law, but what they can do is they can make things a little bit easier for some immigrants. I just spoke about ICE detainers, so just this week in Baltimore, Baltimore said that they would no longer honor ICE detainers.
Yeah. Governor O'Malley just put that out.
Right.
Yeah.
So, which is great because that's the way a lot of immigrants go into the system, and it is a constitutional issue. If you're done with your sentence and you're being held for an extra 2 days, is there a constitutional issue with that? And many argue that there is, which is why Baltimore has decided not to honor ICE detainers. The other thing that Maryland has done, which is great, especially for these kids that we were talking about before, is there is a special visa called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status.
Right.
And under federal immigration law, it is offered to children who are under 21, who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents, and it is not in their best interest to return to their home country. The problem is that the first step is to get a family judge to make those findings that I just listed. And normally, a family judge won't take jurisdiction over somebody who is over 18. And they won't do guardianship, they won't do custody for somebody who's over 18. And it goes in conflict with the federal law, because the federal law says under 21. So there was these kids, 18 to 21, who under immigration law could apply, but no judge was doing it. But in Maryland now, Judges are taking jurisdiction over kids that are under 21 and making these special findings so that the child can then go on in a petition with USCIS for a visa. So that's another way that Maryland has made the immigration process maybe a little bit easier for those people that are here that are seeking legal status.
Interesting. Now let's go back to the juvenile issue. What rights do juveniles have if you're an immigrant, undocumented or documented?
I mean, they essentially have the same rights as anyone else. You know, I mean, they have to normally, as I said, they'll be normally a juvenile when they come into the United States. They're partnered up with a family member who's already here or a sponsor who's willing to take them. So they do have to go to court. They have to go to removal proceedings, and that sponsor says that they will indeed go to court. They'll be updated of their address, and then the U.S. government, as I said, to their best ability, the best ability they can, is supposed to try and facilitate pro bono counsel for minors. And there are many great nonprofits in Maryland, in Virginia, in D.C. that do this work, and especially in the courts here. And of these kids, their cases are for kids who have entered after May 1st of 2014. Their cases are fast-tracked, which means that they're under this expedited system and makes it harder. But so there are these great pro bono organizations and just volunteer attorneys.
Can you name some like
sure.
that?
Sure. So there's Care Coalition, there's Catholic Charities, there's AYUDA, there's Human Rights First. So, and then also AILA, which I'm a member of, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. They have volunteer attorneys that are also, helping take on many of these cases, children and women, recent entrants, pro bono.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's just talk in general. From your practice, are there any general advice that you do have for someone who is an immigrant here and maybe might need some legal advice? Some of the key things that you
I mean, I think one main thing is to avoid notarios. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that take advantage of immigrants because they don't know the system, maybe they don't speak the language, they're scared, they're here, and they just want somebody to help them, and so they'll go to a notario. A notario is a kind of a fake attorney. A notario is a fake attorney. So what they'll do is they'll oftentimes they'll say, yeah, no problem, I can get your green card, just pay me $5,000. Yeah. And then what happens is if you apply for a green card, affirmatively, you also have the right to apply for an employment authorization document. Right. And so the green card might take 6 months to a year to adjudicate, whereas the employment document might take a month. And you'll get the employment document by the mere fact that you've applied for a green card. It will be approved. And so then these people are saying, oh my goodness, this is such a great attorney. I got an employment document. Like, I have a visa. It's not a visa. An employment document is just to give you the right to work. And then your eventual application gets denied. You might even be put in removal proceedings a lot of times. And so you have your employment document, but then you're at risk for being deported. So avoid notarios. Make sure that whoever you're consulting with is an attorney who's barred and has good standing with a bar. And since it's federal law, they can be barred in any state. But avoid somebody that says no worries without even hearing your case.
Well, that is really, really good advice, Alex. We are going to have you come back on and talk a little bit more about some of the other issues that immigrants should be aware of. And I know that many of you all found this very helpful. If you want more information, please contact us at chatwithalawyer@gmail.com, and all our videos can be found at www.wallablegay.com. Thank you for joining us.